Bookseller Crow, almost live.
Good evening, everyone. Hello. Just checking you there. I have got a Ricard pastis. Just did offer Georgia one, but you said
I'm more of a Pernod kind of person.
Oh really? I thought it was the same thing.
Oh no, what do I mean? Snowball.
Oh snowball. Oh, if I'd have known. Fantastic. Oh, we should have laid some on. Well, welcome to Bookseller Crow, everybody, and lovely to see you all. And I'm really excited to welcome Georgia Pritchett tonight, the award-winning comedy drama. To Bookseller Crow. Apparently you used to live here. Yes. No, not in the shop, but just
very nearby, yes. Yes.
How long ago was that?
Well, I was actually born not far away, and then I lived as a teenager in, well, the same block of flats that my friend Dale lives in. What's that road called? Raleigh Court I was in.
Oh, I'm in Drake Court, which is down the bottom of Farquhar Road.
Yes.
Oh. Was Bookseller Crow here?
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
I just moved between. Well, how dare you?
He's been here 25 years. So anyway, enough of trip down memory lane. Even though we are going to do a lot of tripping down memory lane tonight. So you were born up the Elephant and Castle, is that right?
I was born in Norwood, but then moved to Elephant and Castle.
Right, okay.
Yes.
I love the fact that Elephant and Castle is in here, because
yes.
And you were born to the children's author Josephine Haworth and journalist Oliver Pritchett, and you are also the granddaughter of V.S. Pritchett, the renowned writer. So we're very excited. We're excited for you to come here. Your writing credits include, in no particular order, Drop the Dead Donkey, which is a personal favourite, Miranda Hart.
Yes.
Miranda. Spice Girls the movie. The Thick of It, Veep, Succession, and currently on Apple TV, The Shrink Next Door, starring Will Ferrell and Paul Rudd and Catherine Hahn. I have missed some out, but also there's a wonderful story in here about Ronnie Corbett, which I was going to ask you if he was one of your comedy heroes. I'm going to ask you. I'm just going to ask you now. Was he?
Yeah, he definitely was. Yeah, I grew up watching the two Ronnies, and then he phoned me up and asked me to write jokes for him, and we used to meet in a lay-by in Streatham because he lived in Croydon and I was in Peckham, and so we'd meet in a lay-by and I'd hand over a brown envelope of jokes and he'd hand over a brown envelope of money. It was very cool.
That's so exciting and very illicit for you.
Yes, it was.
Oh, I love that story. And so you have 5 Emmys, 5 Writers Guild Awards, a Golden Globe, a BAFTA, and a Producers Guild Award, as well as a Trampoline Proficiency Level 1.
Thank you for mentioning that. Yes.
I think your mantelpiece must be very full and quite saggy.
They're all hidden in the cupboard.
Oh, are they? Yes. Tonight, I'm sure we'll talk about your writing for TV, perhaps a bit later on, but it does feature as one of the strands in My Mess is a Bit of a Life. It's a brilliant comic book through your life, told in vivid and unusually sometimes twisty vignettes about living and perhaps thriving with anxiety. I absolutely loved it, and it's going to be, I'm giving it to everyone for Christmas. So last week we welcomed Izzy Sooty to the stage, and the chairperson Chris Neal, who's also a writer, comedy writer, began by saying talking about a question that no one was allowed to ask. I don't know if anyone was here last week for that talk, but he, I think he was mentioning it because of its naffness, which is perhaps a very British way of kind of saying we're not going to ask Izzy why she writes. And I think that because you touch on the difference between attitudes to do with US attitudes and British attitudes, it reminded me a bit of how you speak about those the differences of approaches. But it seems to me that question is very important to this book, because how you came to write this book was the reason the book is here, if that makes sense. Would you like to explain how this book came about? Which is kind of like the whole book.
Yes, well, I think that's a good question. Why do you write? And although I don't think I have a great answer, except that I love it, and I just have always felt I needed to do it every single day. And even before I could write, when I was a child, I would tell stories into a tape recorder, nearly all about budgies falling out of their nest and not being able to find their way home, which is a niche genre, I grant you, but one day it'll have its moment. Actually, someone said to me recently, people only ever write one story, they just keep writing the same story in different ways, and that made me think, wait, is Succession just 3 budgies who've fallen out of the nest and are trying to find their way home and impress the Logan budgie? So I've always written, and then, as you say, when I was going through a difficult time, I don't know if it's being British or just emotionally unevolved, I went to a therapist. That isn't the British and unevolved bit, but I couldn't speak. I couldn't, considering how much I love words, I couldn't find words that would express how I was feeling. And so she said, why don't you write it down? I thought, that's a terrible idea. I'm not doing that. That's my job. That's, you wouldn't say to a dentist, do more dentistry. That'll sort it out. But eventually I did kind of think, well, maybe that is the answer. And so I started writing down sort of all the times I could remember feeling worried or overwhelmed, which I basically realised was from my earliest memory. And that's how it sort of came to be.
Yeah, I think the writing of it was, to sort of generalise, it was a sort of accumulation of bereavements as well that led to this point of voicelessness. I was sat in the doctor's waiting room today, and there was a video of Davina McCall, bear with me, I do know where I'm going, on the screen, which is all very modern, and she was reading from that children's book. I don't know if you've heard of it, The Horse, the Mole the Dog, could be wrong. Anyway, and the horse asks the mole, what's the bravest word you've ever said? And the mole says, help. And I thought of your book in this way, because it's about being able to speak and be able to, in some way, find help. And I thought that we're very bad at thinking that's a brave thing to do, I think, to ask for help, but it is. And so I was just wondering, before we dive into the book, has this book kind of recalibrated you in a way, do you feel, by the writing of it?
It was really scary. It's still scary. This is horrifying. Because I think as a scriptwriter, you just, you can put words literally in other people's mouths, and you're completely anonymous, and you express yourself by stealth, and that's a very comfy place to be. So to suddenly write something so personal felt very different. But I must say, I think, when we're in the middle of our sort of chaotic lives and all the mayhem, I think it's very easy to be hard on ourselves and think, I could be a better writer or partner or friend or mother or whatever it is. And there's actually something interesting when you're writing down and sort of looking back at the past. I think you can find a bit of compassion for your younger self and think, oh well, I was trying my best. I'm not perhaps the biggest fool to walk the earth. Top 10, but not number 1. So I think it did help in a funny kind of way that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah. Good, excellent. So it begins in childhood and runs chronologically up to sort of quite near to the present day.
Yes.
And Wordsworth called moments that we remember in our lives spots of time.
Oh.
And so these obviously are some of your spots of time, but I was wondering if there was quite a few left on the sort of cutting room floor.
Not really. I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it, the way memory works, in that once, I always think of myself as someone with a terrible memory, but then once you start remembering something, it kind of opens doors and you remember more and more. And what I found really interesting when writing it was the sort of impressionistic nature you have of particularly your earlier memories, when you didn't understand the full picture, you just sort of were aware of something happening. And I didn't want to sort of imbue those memories with any kind of hindsight or adult understanding. I wanted to sort of leave them as kind of impressionistic sort of moments. And then when I was writing it, I read this really interesting thing about the way our brains work, which is that we only ever remember anything once. Did you know this?
No.
Apparently we only remember anything once, and then after that we remember remembering it. So we're all kind of always writing our memoir in a way, in that we're constantly sort of honing and editing our sort of stories or anecdotes or origin stories. So and I found that really interesting, and tried to be sort of true to that nature of memory, where you might remember something so tiny and seemingly trivial in such sort of vivid detail, and that retains as much importance in your brain as some moment where you kind of brush up against history or some huge kind of national event. That the two are sort of have equal footing in your kind of consciousness. I find that really interesting.
Yeah, and that's the way that you the voice slightly changed, obviously, with the age of you. I thought was really well done because it's left, obviously a child doesn't, as you say, doesn't understand everything that's going on, but we as the reader understand on your behalf. But I also wondered about voice in the memoir, and if you had to create a kind of persona to write the book, or was it a kind of or would you think it's really close to your voice?
Yes, I think that is me. I wanted to be honest. I didn't want to sort of pretend I was someone I'm not. So
well, it's a wonderful companion of a book then, and you must be great to have around the dinner table. So your childhood then, let's start your friend David.
Yeah.
Is it at school he encouraged you to speak?
Yes.
Because I thought it was a really excellent way of starting a book about a sort of wordlessness.
Yeah.
And how you said half a word and then you'd say the second syllable. Is that right?
Yes, swear words.
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't. I mean, it's so interesting that, as you say, because I love words and I read all the time and write all the time. But there's been so many times in my life where I haven't been able to find the words. And when I first went to school, I didn't speak for about 2 years. So this was my friend's way of getting me to speak. Was he would say half a swear word and I'd say the rest. Which worked very well. Yeah.
He really understood you as well, didn't he?
Yeah.
I love that. So would you like to read? I know you're going to read a bit from each sort of
yes. So I'll read a bit. I thought I'd read a bit about sort of one of my earlier memories of being anxious, which this must have been about 3 here, because I was at nursery school. One day I arrived at nursery late. All the other children were there. My favourite place on the rug was taken, the one where you could hold a crayon against the radiator and watch while it melted. As I unzipped my anorak, I realised that everyone in the room was singing "We're Going to the Zoo." This sent me into total panic. I absolutely, on no account, wanted to go to the zoo with other children. Not now. I'd had no warning. I wasn't prepared. I had the wrong socks on. Also, since when did people deliver horrific news in the form of a song? It seemed inappropriate. Could I run? Could I hide? I zipped my anorak back up and considered barricading myself in the Wendy house. As I crawled sniper style towards the plastic door, the children started singing Jack and Jill Went Up the Hill. Now there's a song. Short, succinct, and with a clear health and safety message. Why on earth were these people in favour of going to the zoo when a mere trip up a hill caused one child to break his head and another to suffer from numerous undisclosed injuries? Luckily, after a quick burst of Humpty Dumpty, who, let's remember, died from sitting on a wall, they wandered outside to play in the sandpit. They must have changed their minds about going to the zoo. Disaster averted.
It's written in short, quite succinct pieces, and then you have some longer, really good stories as well. Well, it's all really good, but you know, more detail.
Yeah.
And the French Exchange is one of my favourites, and I just think that was so, because would you like to talk a bit about the French Exchange?
I mean, I'm still traumatised, so I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny, people keep saying, oh, tell me, about the choice you made of these sort of small vignettes, and as though I've made some clever literary choice, and actually I'm just embracing my shortcomings as a writer, because I'm so used to writing scenes that is basically scenes in a different format. So that's how I think my brain frames things now. So yes, there are scenes, and then there's a very I'm sure lots of people have suffered through French exchanges, but this was particularly horrifying. Just sort of on an Alp with no bathroom, and the dad hadn't told the girl I was going to visit. I think I was 15, she was 14. She was sort of chain smoking Gauloise and very sophisticated, and she was horrified because she was having an affair with a man in the next lodge down the Alp, and her parents didn't know. So I was, really.
And this is where you had a code word with your parents set up, but they didn't quite.
Plan B.
Plan
yes.
B. You had to shout Plan B.
Yes.
But it's full of wonderful details. Like is that the story where there's a wind-up phone that only recognises men's voices?
No, that was in America. Right. Yes, it was. That was. I was stuck on an island in America and wanted to escape, and the phone, I don't know if it knew they were men. I don't think it was being sexist, but it just worked on deep. So even men who were incredulous got cut off. So it just didn't like it when your voice went up. So there was no way.
It's full of these wonderful moments, but also a real, very, really sad time when you were at school. And were you at school in New Cross, or was it just your friends? There was the New Cross fire, and I didn't realise there was a plaque now on the house where it happened. But,
I think that's, as I was saying earlier, the sort of, these sort of huge things that happened that, that the whole nation was aware of, and tragedies are sort of all part of our kind of makeup, and I think, and also the sort of casual racism of the 70s and 80s sort of really seemed, pretty bleak when I sort of looked back on it, and and in some ways, I mean, things are still bad, but I think things have improved a little. But sort of just looking back at experiences and sort of the way that tragic event was handled by the police and the media was, very something that I'd lived through, but I suppose when I look back was, shocking all over again.
Definitely. So you were at that point when you were at school. You were obviously an adolescent.
Yes.
And there's a wonderful moment where you chart I think there's two moments in the book where you chart the kind of cusp between what it means from going from being a girl to a woman. And I think one mentions a bush.
Yes, so you know you've moved from girlhood to womanhood when men stop masturbating furtively from bushes and start shouting at you from cars. It's a beautiful moment.
Yes, yes.
We should have a ceremony like the bar mitzvah or something. Yeah,
that's right. But also, I think was when you went to the Wimpy. At the Elephant and Castle shopping centre, and you had this kind of, it reminded me, that's why I sort of fancied a Ricard, a sort of Parisian moment in the Wimpy.
Yes, I wanted to mark this beautiful moment, and the sort of most sophisticated thing I could think of was to go to Wimpy in the Elephant and Castle shopping centre and buy myself a burger and a milkshake, and I sat there with the cockroaches crawling up and down the walls thinking, this is as good as life is going to get.
So each of your family, except your brother, I think, has a nickname in the book.
Yes.
And you have the witch, your mother,
yes.
The patriarchy, father, even though it's all told with full of love, it's not, the reasons are there, and your partner, the moose. And so could you tell us a bit more about how these nicknames came about, and was it you that gave them, or were they decided amongst the family?
Yeah, I think my mum's was always very good at nicknames, so I think I inherited that. But yeah, just I do love to inflict a nickname on people. My children get a different one every week, and often a song that accompanies it. But yeah, it's my dad is so unpatriarchal that it amused me to call him the patriarchy. And yeah, and my partner is called the moose, and that was just sort of between me and her, and then now we've got children and they go to school, so now all the teachers and all kids and everyone in our neighbourhood calls her the moose. I'm not that happy about that.
That's great. So you moved out of home and got various jobs.
Yes.
Which are charted very wittily. The Catford Charcuterie?
No, the Catford's Broadway.
Is that where you first felt your calling?
Exactly. Yes, I worked at the Catford Broadway. Is that still there, the theatre?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, just about.
Yeah, and I had a Saturday job at Harrods in the charcuterie department.
Oh, nice. With eating fizzy pâté.
Yeah, don't do that. That's what I learned from that job. Never eat pâté that you've stolen and put in your pocket and has been there all day and is now fizzy.
So you had these brilliant jobs where you could, like Patricia Highsmith's Smile, you could style, you could observe people.
Yes.
And did you start making notes?
No, I didn't. No.
Point.
No.
You didn't write a diary or thing.
No.
This could be great material.
I should have done.
No.
That would have been a good idea. Where were you?
I was in Barclays Bank eating a fizzy sausage.
But I've got that second bit to read about
right,
that time and
Oh.
my anxieties as a young adult. Where is it? Yes, so this is while I was a bit homeless and staying with different friends. Staying at other people's houses sometimes presented a bigger problem than different pillows. One house had dry rot, wet rot, mould, spores and a mouse situation. One morning as I was making myself breakfast, I wondered what the strange smell was. My question was answered when my toast popped out of the toaster and, simultaneously, a flaming mouse was catapulted out of the other side. It was both spectacular and deeply upsetting. Another of the places I stayed in was infested with snails. I was scared of snails, so when I slept on the floor, I used to draw a line of salt around my whole body. It looked like the chalk outline of a murder victim, but it worked. I woke up one morning and my friend discovered a snail trail going across her pillow, then a gap where her head had been, and then the snail trail resumed. I felt it would have been worse if the snail trail hadn't resumed after the gap. I also felt it was time to find my own place.
So you do find your own place, and then you start to find your own place in writing. You write for Radio 4, is that
Yes.
right? There you turn up with some jokes.
Yes.
And
Yeah, they had this amazing system years ago. There was this programme on Radio 4 that was about the week's news, a sort of sketch show. And it was like an open thing. Anyone could go in for the meeting to hear what they wanted jokes about. So it was a lot of homeless people wanting to keep warm, and then a few hopeful writers. And yeah, you got £8 a joke, so that was my first actual paid work.
it must have been a very proud moment.
It was very exciting, yeah.
And then you were writing for Spitting Image, is that right?
Yeah.
And do you think the doors were a little bit more open in those days to, like, that you, because there wasn't the internet and stuff, you actually just had to sort of turn up to places?
Yeah, turn up or send things in, yeah. I mean, in that sense, I mean, I think it's in some ways easier now, but and certainly in those days it was so, everyone else was male and had been to Oxford or Cambridge, so it didn't feel very open.
No, because you were the only woman writing on, and the book charts. It's really fascinating. It's a window into that world, and how difficult it was, and how, I think probably, and also there was a woman called Debbie who was. You met her, and there was only her and you at that point.
Yeah, we never got to work together because why would you need two women on something? So yeah, but I knew her. Yeah, but she, yes, that was a very sad story. It's I started off sort of thinking, oh, it's weird, there are no other women in this room or on this show, but it'll change. And then it wasn't until 25 years later, and when I was in the States, that I ever got to work with other women. So that was...
Was that with Veep? Was that on Veep?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was a long time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But they called you George as well, didn't they?
Yes.
And
etc.
And etc. Because you did describe, you were quite kind about the men and the reason why perhaps they didn't want women writers, that women writers were frightening to them because they were mumbling men who don't look at each other in the eye. I mean, this was a particular time. It wasn't obviously your current writers.
I think. Well, there was definitely overt sexism, but there is also this other thing that is, there's in this business. There's just a certain type of, and I like to think of myself as socially inadequate, so I say it in a fond way, but sort of socially awkward, mumbly, quite nerdy men who feel more comfortable with other men like that. So it's not that they're thinking, I don't like women or women can't do it. They just feel more at ease with men like themselves. So that's a very tricky situation because it's not a hate crime, but it is a problem because it means you get excluded.
So obviously you don't succeed in the world of TV writing and drama writing without a form of self-confidence, do you think? Or is that the wrong...
I don't know if I'm confident. I think I'm just relentless.
Yeah.
and maybe a bit defiant, really, because I think, and I say in the book, that when I was at school, I went to this very mad sort of hippie school where I didn't learn anything, and we just called the you only had to go in if you felt it was right for you to go in that day, and we just called the teachers by their names, and one of them would drive me home on his motorbike, and we just sort of expressed ourselves through finger painting, and the closest I got to doing maths was going to the shop and buying them cigarettes and coming back with the right change. But so I learnt nothing. So then by the time I got to secondary school, all I could do was write stories. So I was very bad in all the subjects apart from English. And then when I would write a story, my teacher would give me detention because he assumed I was copying from someone because I was good at one thing. So I think that sort of defiant thing of, well, that's not going to stop me. And then, as I chart in the book, I've had some really terrible reviews for lots of things I've written. I've sort of those old men in the Muppets, Statler and Waldorf, I like to sort of think that they've just been following me around. And so I think as well, you just kind of think, well, they're not going to stop me, I'm going to be defiant. So I think it's more sort of being relentless and defiant than confident.
Yeah, it was. I'm glad you cleared that up because people talk about self-confidence, and I don't actually ever know what that is because it's such a strange thing to try and quantify as well. Yeah. And defiance is probably a better way of putting it. So your internal world did keep seeping out through your nose at times of stress, and your way of describing this is quite is really wonderful, even though it obviously wasn't wonderful. But your nosebleeds happen throughout the book, and so one of my more attractive qualities is that instead of expressing my emotions like normal people might, that I, in moments of sort of great joy or great sadness, I have a nosebleed, which is not ideal. So that has been a feature of many important landmark moments. But it did pay off momentarily when I was working on Veep, and there's this moment, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but it's about the Vice President of the United States of America, and there's this moment where she becomes president, and her sort of loyal assistant, who's utterly devoted to her, when we sort of knew he would be so excited, and we were trying to think, well, what would he do? Would he laugh? Would he cry? And I was like, this is obvious. Everyone looked a bit oddly at me, but we did do it, and it really did work. So there was where you kind of thought, oh, well, it hasn't all been in vain. That was a good moment. I thought it was really well. It was interesting how your internal world just comes out in a different way. Yes. To perhaps how other people's
liquid from wrong part of face. That's so close.
So I'm not sure about what your third reading is, but I'm going to skip to later in the book where you describe how you get pregnant. Yes. And the trials around that time. Which are really moving, and then there's a sort of slight, whilst you're giving birth, you're actually quite polite about how
everyone says that childbirth brings out the true you, and that there's all those stories of women sort of bellowing and swearing and punching their partners in the face and things, but the true inner me is just incredibly polite. So my partner and the doctor were discussing, I don't even know how you say it. Is it lichen or lichen?
Oh, lichen.
I looked to Dale.
Is it lichen or lichen?
Lichen. On the Shetland Islands. And I just kept putting my hand up and saying, sorry to interrupt, but there's a baby coming out. And the midwife afterwards said, I've never seen anyone do that before. Raise their hand and apologise for giving birth.
So I'm not sure if I'm going beyond your reading, but so the book then details motherhood and your feelings about, whether you're good at it or not. And your son's The Speck.
Yes, and The Scrap.
And The Scrap.
They were massive.
Yes. The Speck, who was diagnosed with autism, and The Scrap, who's neurodiverse. And I really felt these passages because my nephew's autistic, and we all grew up in Penge, which is just down the hill. But my nephew's American. He has an American accent. He's the only American amongst us. So I particularly enjoyed the chapters as well with the surprises.
Yes, yeah.
The surprises chapter, which I don't know if you're reading out, or the party also.
Oh, yeah.
But these are chapters near the end of the book, which it becomes. The book by this point is accumulated that I feel like I know you, but it's almost like constellations of a life. So it feels like very full, like you're a friend by the end of the book.
Yeah,
so I think that's why it was incredibly, even more moving.
Right.
Than the beginning.
Yeah. I was going to read that chapter about. So my sons are now 15 and 13, but this is a chapter. That happened a few years ago when I had this conversation with my son. So the conversation I had been dreading having with my son arrives, not the one about sex. We've been over that several times and he still seems to be confused. The last time I asked him if he knew where babies came from, he said, "A lady's front porch?" And I decided that was near enough. This conversation starts with him saying, "Why do I go to a special school? Even though I've been waiting for a question like this, I suddenly don't have a good answer. I tell him that everyone has things they're good at and things they find difficult. What does he think he's good at, or what does he find difficult? He says he's good at everything. Let's think about your friends, I say. What are they good at, or what do they find difficult? How about Huang?" The Speck looks thoughtful. "He's good at being Chinese," he observes. "Yes, he is," I say. "It comes naturally to him, whereas I am rubbish at being Chinese." "Okay, how about Joseph?" The Speck thinks again. "He has Jewish problems," he says. "What are those?" I ask, slightly alarmed. "He can't eat bacon," says the Speck with sympathy, because bacon is his favourite food. "True," I say, "this conversation isn't really going to plan." "And how about Zach?" I ask cautiously. "Zach has a condition called Proteus syndrome, which means that his face is a different shape." The Speck thinks at length. Finally he says, "He has a hearing aid." I marvel at the fact that the Speck has noticed a tiny hearing aid and what is essentially a rather unusual looking face. "Let's have another think about things you find difficult," I suggest. "This," he says, and he gets up and leaves.
So the book ends with how the book began, which is how you came to write it, and with the therapist suggesting. But also, at this point, you're working with Julia Louis Dreyfus, filming with Joe Biden, who's I found out, surprisingly anti-English. And his mum, who is a poet, wrote lots of angry poetry.
Irish, she's Irish and really not happy about the English.
And you're also filming, I don't know if this was Veep or it was perhaps a separate project, but you're writing comedy lines for Michelle Obama, who is taking them and word perfect.
Yes.
But you're also describing yourself as a ghost or an alien with something trying to burst from your chest, and so you're sort of experiencing depersonalization and a detachment from yourself because of all this stress and these anxieties that have sort of been charted throughout the book. And you convinced everyone you were okay, I think, or you did a very good job at acting like yourself, which is incredibly stressful to act like who you think you are. And so you were still writing comedy throughout this very intense time. So when you were writing that comedy, was it like the only time that you felt like you were at home in yourself, or like it was the only place that was the sort of sanctuary from this sort of worrying and detaching place.
I think it's easy. I think we all play roles, don't we? And certainly as a comedy writer, I did feel it was literally my job to be happy, and that not being happy wasn't an option. So yeah, I definitely, as you say, pretended that everything was all right. And often when people have read the book, sort of say, how could you write comedy throughout that? But actually it was really a sort of solace for me and a kind of escape, and I think it did keep me sane-ish. And yeah, I loved doing it, but I think all those things that I hadn't put words to or expressed sort of caught up with me, and yeah, as you say, that's sort of why the book, where the book starts and also where it ends.
Yeah, it's very clever. I also like that you've got stamped in your passport, you are an alien with an extraordinary ability.
Yes.
That the Americans stamped.
Yeah, that's the nicest thing anyone
Is that
said.
your visa?
Yes. Well, that, and my younger son says I've got eyebrows like beautiful socks. So those are the two nicest things.
Is that in your passport?
I'd like it to be in my passport, yes, it's a distinguishing feature. Yeah.
Well, thank you. That's the end of my spiel. But I know we're going to have questions from the audience, probably perhaps about Succession or...
yes, I'm so sorry about Monday's episode. It was very dark.
With the vaginal
entrance.
Yes. If for anyone that's seen this week who's watching Succession. But does anyone have any questions for Georgia about anything? Not just the book, but TV writing or the Miranda Hart. Yes.
No, since you're talking about Succession, if I could, can I just say it's the best written show I've ever watched. I think it's so brilliant. So thank you for everything you've done on that show, particularly the last episode. Actually,
I did think, oh, that's too dark. He should have just let the tiny Wu-Tang Clan play. And time.
Yeah, it was the first. It's actually, I think it's the first of the whole thing from start to now that I've ended feeling quite sort of bit down and a bit weird.
Yeah. I was really cross with Roman after Monday's episode.
But I'm so interested in the sort of the writing process for that show, because I guess having come from a traditionally British comedy writing background, and then you hear about writers' rooms and the way these American shows are written, I just sort of wondered what the process is, because I read somewhere about how Jesse writes some of it from like a shared office in Brixton or something, like someone's house. Like, what? I didn't realise it was sort of like it gets written in different places, and I was just curious to know how it all comes together.
Well, it's funny because it is an sort of strictly speaking an American show, but the main writers are the ones who sort of started off are all exactly as you say, British comedy writers, and we met in Brixton in a room together. So normally on British shows there isn't the money to pay for more than one writer, so it's a more sort of solitary endeavour. But I had worked with Jesse on other things, so that there are a sort of group of us who'd worked together over the years in comedy, and there was some doubt, I think, felt by some people whether a group of sort of scruffy, shambolic British comedy writers could pull off a glossy American drama. And in some ways we didn't, because they had to employ a wealth consultant, because none of us had any idea what it might be like to be rich. And we got lots of it wrong. I remember in season 1 I wrote this episode about the Thanksgiving, and I got really told off by the wealth consultant because I'd said things in my script like, the maids bring in lunch, the maids dressed in maids outfits bring in lunch, and they were like, where have you got this idea from? And I was like, I think a mixture of porn and racist Jerry episodes, I don't know. But apparently they don't have maids in maids uniforms. They have very handsome young men in chinos and polo t-shirts. And then I also, because it was like the poshest thing I could think of, said they had napkins in napkin rings, and they were like, trailer trash. They'd never do that. And I think I had Marsha saying, the turkey's ready, and they were like, she wouldn't know where the kitchen was, what they were eating. And then I had someone wearing a coat, and they were like, no rich people have coats. They go from their car to their jet to their building. They never wear coats. Their shoes always look new because they haven't trodden on ground. They're just on carpets in different things they own. And yeah, it was really fat. And then the actors got told off because they kept ducking to get in the helicopters, and they were like, no, rich people just stride out knowing that they won't get their heads chopped off. We failed in many respects, but I think that sort of comedy sensibility of, I think with dialogue and with comedy, the rhythm is important and every word counts, and you spend so long going over and over lines and making sure it's as sort of economical and as good as it possibly can be. So I think taking that sort of sensibility to a drama has kind of paid off in an unexpected way, in that the dialogue, I think this is massive generalisation, but when I've sort of read dramas by American writers in the past, they do these incredible stage directions that are like the great American novels, beautiful, all about the character's inner world. We're all rubbish at stage direction. It's all just he comes in, he goes out. But I think, and they're all very into the plot, and I think our sort of focus on the dialogue and rather than the stage directions and the plot. It's amazing how little happens really in an episode of Succession often. It's just kind of tiny.
They can find you a book for your girlfriend, your husband, your girl or your boy. And if you've got a need for an uplifting read, Justine and Jonathan can pick out a book you'll enjoy. What a book at the Bookseller Crow on the hill. What a book at the Bookseller Crow on the hill.
Crystal Palace Hill it is. But you can order online.